Exactly. It just opened.
Open up. Hey everybody, there's some of you on there. Well, it's good. I hope you had a good spring break, and I hope you're all doing well. Let's see. So, welcome back. We had yeah, I love that phrase, Stacy. Good rising. A friend of mine uses that all the time. Says to me, sends me texts in the morning. He says, "Good rising" or "Grand rising." So it's a great phrase. I have my window open. If it gets noisy, I'm going to close it. But yeah, I hope you had a good break. I tried to make sure that I took time as well. We have another, what, 6, 7 weeks or 8 weeks of the semester, if that much, left. And so the spring break is a time um, to catch your breath a little bit, get a little bit of a break, and for some people to catch up on work. I had to do work for another class, but I did it quite leisurely. But welcome, so welcome back. So I want to talk a little bit today about this week, the next weeks, and the end of the semester. Um, yes, so we're going to do that. We're going to be making a transition this week from fiction to theater, and we're coming in for a landing with the semester. And yeah, and that's what we're going to do. All right. So the last class we were together, which was a while ago. It feels like a long, long time ago. It was only like maybe a week and a half, right? But it feels longer. So the last time we were together, we went over a story called Forgiveness by Rebecca Brown. And we discussed the theme of forgiveness, the idea of forgiveness. What does it mean to forgive? And and I don't know what your religious practices are, but we just came off of a lot of, or we're still in the midst of several, like Easter and Passover and all of that. And so there is this element of renewal, right? That's what Easter religiously, but also socially means. Easter is like the spring, it's renewal, it's rebirth, right? So that is going, so that's the kind of energy. So there's something inside of that with forgiveness as well. Um, and so we read that story, and that story also had the arm that was a symbol, a big symbol in it. And so we talked a bit about the different ideas, and we talked a little bit about what um, the um, next essay is going to be about. So I'm going to talk about the essay. We're going to close out fiction today. We're going to introduce theater today. We'll be working with theater today. We'll be doing some more work on Wednesday. On Monday, we're going to read a play. Also, the essay that's going to be due is going to be due not till next week, Monday. And so you have like this week, today and Wednesday, to ask me any questions. But I'm going to go over the handout first, and then we'll take a look at it. But before I talk about okay, yes, says female main character. Yes, Alan, right. I no longer believe in the myth of forgiveness. So before we talk about the essay and go through the handout for the essay, I'm going to close out fiction. So, and I'm going to be talking about them like intertwined now, and then we're going to look at the handout. So the same way you did your fiction, your poetry essay, now you're going to do your fiction essay, right? You're going to look at some elements of fiction, and you're going to discuss it in your essay. We've read about, I think, 7 or 8 stories together in the class, and there's still another 5 that are in the folder that you can so choose to use as one of or part of what you're going to be writing about. And so what I'm going to do is we're going to read the first page of the 5 stories. I'm going to read them to you so you can hear them, and you can decide maybe if you want to read more of one of these today. But I think by the end of class today, you should have decide what it is that you want to write about. And on Wednesday, we can talk a little bit about that too, in case people have ideas and they want to do it. I will open up. Did I open up? Oh, so I'll talk about that on how to upload it as well, because there is the assignment is in course content, but you're going to upload this to Turnitin. And we're going to upload this one, the theater one, and then your final exam. All of these, I believe, get Turnitin. The final exam may be safe assigned, but it depends what the department uses for that. All right, so let's close out fiction. So I'm going to share my screen and share with you the last stories that we have. Okay, so there's 5 stories in your folder. So all the works that you've been reading this semester, from the poetry back into the fiction part, in the fiction part, it's a selection of authors. Of course, there are like hundreds, even thousands of authors that you could read. There is a canon, that means a selected groups of works that many universities use. That list continues to grow and change. And so some of the works you see are pulled from there. Some of them are other works that I've come across that, I find they have something to offer in terms of what we can learn from literature and what we can learn, like I said, from day one, about ourselves. Because one of the things I love about literature is that we learn things about ourselves, right, as human beings, how either the interactions, some understanding, or we can learn possibilities of how to live, how to think, right, and how to be. So, so all the stories do that. The one that's on the screen right now that you can see is one called "The Good Man Is Hard to Find," and that's by Flannery O'Connor. And Flannery O'Connor, just like Raymond Carver, just like John Updike, just like you didn't read, just drew a blank on her name, Grace Paley. There are many writers that are known for their short stories, right? And so Flannery O'Connor is one of them. And she, so we're going to read, this is one of her classic stories called "The Good Man Is Hard to Find." So what I'm going to do with these stories, I want you to listen and see, because maybe this might be a story that you might want to do in addition to the rest of them. Now, it's almost like our poetry packet. Remember our poetry packet? They were like, I don't know, there's like almost 100 poems, not that many. There's probably like 60 poems in that poetry packet. And we didn't read all 60 poems, but some of you, when you were doing your papers, looked through it and found a poem. I like that poem, and you wrote about that poem, right? Most of you picked poems that we had worked on or did together in class, and that's perfectly fine. But at this point, between poetry and now with fiction, you have the skills and have the language and have the vocabulary to be able to read a story, understand things, pick out themes in the story. You can find symbolism, you can find different things that are happening in the story and write about that. So that's a skill that you have. You had some of it when you walked in. Definitely you're going to have it when you walk out this classroom. And it's something that you could do the next time you pick up a magazine, next time you read a book, the next time you read some poetry, or you're sitting on the subway and you're looking at a poem that isn't an ad, it's in the Poetry in Motion. You'll be able to read it, understand it, unlock it, as we've been doing in class. So I'm going to read this first page, and then after I read them all, if any of you have questions, we can ask questions about it. But if not, then I'm going to go into the explaining the essay, going over the details for the essay. This is "A Good Man Is Hard to Find" by Flannery O'Connor. And then after I read it, I'll give you a little bit of a summary of what the story is about. If you couldn't tell from the beginning, but I might ask you all what you think the story's about. That might be fun. Okay, here we go. The grandmother didn't want to go to Florida. She wanted to visit some of her connections in East Tennessee, and she was seizing at every chance to change Bailey's mind. Bailey was a son she lived with, her only boy. He was sitting in the edge of his chair at the table, bent over the orange sports section of the journal. "Now look here, Bailey," she said. "See here, read this." And she stood with one hand on her thin hip and the other rattling the newspaper at his bald head. "Here, this fellow that calls himself the Misfit is loose from the federal pen and headed toward Florida, and you read here what it says he did to these people. Just you read it. I wouldn't take my children in any direction with a criminal like that loose in it. I couldn't answer to my conscience if I did." Bailey didn't look up from his reading, so she wheeled around and then faced the children's mother, a young woman in slacks whose face was broad and innocent as a cabbage and was tied around with a green headkerchief that had 2 points at the top like rabbit's ears. She was sitting on the sofa, feeding the baby his apricots out of a jar. The children have been to Florida before, the old lady said. You all ought to take them somewhere else for a change, so they would see different parts of the world and be broad. They never have been to East Tennessee. You can read along, I hope, unless you're on your phone, it might be small. The last two paragraphs. The children's mother didn't seem to hear her, but the 8-year-old boy, John Wesley, a stocky child with glasses, said, if you don't want to go to Florida, why don't you stay at home? He and the little girl June Star were reading the funny papers on the floor. She wouldn't stay at home to be a queen for a day, June Star said, without raising her yellow head. That's the first page of A Good Man is Hard to Find. So we've got this grandmother who, there's a family trip, and they're trying to go to, they're going to go to Florida, and she is saying there is a killer on the loose, and she wouldn't take her kids to Florida, but partly because she doesn't want to go to Florida. She wants to go to East Tennessee to see family, but that's not what the family wants to do. So he's trying to convince the family. She tries with her son first. He doesn't have it. He tries with his wife. She's not listening. But the two other kids that are on the floor are, right? So the grandmother represents old values. Yeah, I think maybe, did you say you read this, Alan? Did somebody read this? I remember in last class, someone said that they had read this story. Anyway, what do you think? So here's the story of a grandmother trying to convince people not to go on a trip because of these criminals that are on the loose, and that she says, you know what they did to these people. What do you think is going to happen? Any guesses? You can put it in the chat or say it out loud. And while you're thinking to unmute or chat, I'm going to close my window. Any thoughts or ideas of what? Yes, right. Well, Alan, I think you did read. I think you said you did read it. So we know, Alan's letting us know, the family does meet up with these killers. You know, they have it, and there is a very intense conversation that happens between the main killer and the grandmother toward the very end of the story. All right, so you can check that story out if you want. A Good Man is Hard to Find, and that's by Flannery O'Connor. Or here's another one, Apollo. And Apollo, I'm going to move the chat over here. I'm actually going to make myself small, so you don't have to see that. We have to see more screens. So Apollo is by a writer named Chimamanda. Florida, anything can happen. Most likely they're going to run into a killer. Yes, Viviano, you're right. And that's exactly what happens. There's also, before I go into Apollo, that's a technique, right? And they call this a smoking gun, right? That sometimes a writer will introduce something, an activity. The idea, they call it a smoking gun, that if you bring a gun onto, it comes from theater. If you bring a gun onto stage, it's such kind of polemic, like a controversial thing to have, that something needs to happen to it. Like the audience is going to be thinking about that gun. So at some point it has to go off, right? And what's going to happen. So so that's what the Good Man is Hard to Find. Now we're going to swing to Apollo, right? And that's by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And Chimamanda is from Nigeria. She's a Nigerian writer, but very popular here in the United States and around the world. She's a very popular writer. And her book, Americana, was a book that was the book of the semester for Ostos a couple of years ago. So so let's go from Southern Gothic American, that story is a Southern Gothic story, the Flannery O'Connor story, which is, remember Rebecca Brown's is a Gothic story. So so we go from Southern Gothic to Nigerian story that has elements of folklore and folktale inside of it too. Here's Apollo. And I'm gonna give you this. The Apollo that they're talking about is not like the Greek god or the Roman god, and it's not the Apollo spacecraft, because sometimes Americans associate Apollo here in Nigeria is pink eye. So that's another word for pink eye. So that's what the Apollo refers to in this story. So Apollo. Twice a month, like a dutiful son, I visited my parents in Enugu. in their small over-furnished flat that grew dark in the afternoon. Retirement had changed them, shrunk them. They were in their late 80s, both small and mahogany skinned, with a tendency to stoop. They seemed to look more and more alike, as though all the years together had made their features blend and bleed into one another. They even smelled alike, a menthol scent, from the green vial of Vicks Vapor Rub they passed to each other, carefully rubbing a little in their nostrils and on aching joints. When I arrived, I would find them either sitting out in the veranda overlooking the road or sunk into the living room sofa watching Animal Planet. They had a new, simple sense of wonder. They marveled at the wiliness of wolves, laughed at the cleverness of apes, and asked each other, Ifukwa, did you see that? They had, too, a new baffling patience for incredible stories. Once, my mother told me that a sick neighbor in Aba, our ancestral home, had vomited a grasshopper, a living, writhing insect, which, she said, was proof that wicked relatives had poisoned him. Somebody texted us a picture of the grasshopper, my father said. They always supported each other's stories. When my father told me that Chief Okeke's young house help had mysteriously died, and the story around town was that the chief had killed the teenager and used her liver for money-making rituals, my mother added, they say he used the heart too. 15 years earlier, my parents would have scoffed at these stories. My mother, a professor of political science, would have said nonsense in her crisp manner. And my father, a professor of education, would merely have snorted, the story's not worth the effort of speech. It puzzled me that they had shed those old selves and become the kind of Nigerians who hold anecdotes about diabetes cured by drinking holy water. So this is Apollo by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. And as you can see, um, she begins setting up the story, as the narrator is saying, is a son, male narrator. And she's setting up the story with these old parents, right? Telling these outlandish stories about almost superstitious story. But then she tells us that this is unusual for them to have evolved in this because his mother was involved in political science and the father was a professor of education, right? So they were both professors, both teachers. So in this story, we will learn more about, they will tell him a story about somebody who he grew up with. And that story triggers a memory. So the story takes us back in time. And he starts thinking about a time of when he had this friendship with this houseboy that used to live there and help to take care of him. And so Apollo, the pink eye, becomes part of this because the young guy gets pink eye and is not treated, the houseboy not treated as well, but and the protagonist is speaking defies the parents to help take care of him. There's more to the story, but it's a really wonderful story as well. So you can check out Apollo. Okay. Um, let's go to the next one, which is Shorty by Daisy Hernandez. Daisy is she's Cuban American. She is probably in her 40s. And so probably a little younger than this crew. I mean, Chimamanda, I think, is in her mid 40s or late 40s. Fanny O'Connor is no longer alive. And so Daisy Hernandez is younger than some of the writers we've been reading, more contemporary, and she's Cuban American. And her story, we're going to read the first page, is Shorty. I meet her at Julie's. It's Saturday night, and that means every tri-state Puerto Rican lesbian is dancing salsa and having too many Coronas at Julie's in Manhattan. I've always wondered about that club. I mean, how many Latinas do you know named Julie? Julissa, sure. Julia, yeah, but Julie? So there I am on the dance floor with my buddy Marisol, showing off my best steps, when all of a sudden I do a little spin and I'm staring straight at some woman's tits. And I'm not talking about the kind of cleavage where it's two droopy tetas propped up with wire bra. This is the real stuff. Two round, large breasts squeezed together in a baby T. Just as I'm about to bend my neck back to look up at the homegirl, Marisol spins me around, laughing. Oye, loca, carefully before you get some old butch kicking your ass for staring at her woman. I lean into Marisol. Did you see the cleavage on that girl? Marisol's short, curly hair smells like oranges, but I know it's just the nasty anti-frizz gel she uses. She shakes her head. Lou, she's too tall for you. La cleavage would never give you the time of day. That's why I love Mari. We met at some gay parade years ago, and she's the perfect friend. La hermanita who nicknames the new hottie La Cleavage. That's how well she knows me. Okay. So that's Shorty by Daisy Hernandez. And you can tell the language is different. You know, this is about like two best friends. Shorty, of course, is the protagonist. And you could get hints that she is short when she meets this woman, the other woman in the club, that she's like her this up to her breast and she has to kind of look up to see her. So the woman that she is and her friend Marisol says, you know, she's too tall for you. um, so this is a story about, I can tell you, it's about the relationship between Shorty and, we learn her name later on, but like the woman they are referring to here as La Cleavage. And this story also takes you into subculture the same way that Apollo takes you into this kind of this culture of Nigerian folklore and just Nigerian customs from the perspective of a um, middle or upper middle class family, right, with their values. Shorty takes you into the world of working class lesbian Latina values. So there is language and culture that is inside of this story that is particular to that. So that would be Shorty, and it's a relationship thing. Um, the next one is everyday use, and I believe we did not do everyday use in this class. But everyday use is by a very classic American writer named Alice Walker. And Alice Walker wrote, yes, Catherine, you've read Everyday Use before, cool. Um, and um, and so she wrote The Color Purple, which was not only a book but a movie and a Broadway show, and she's written many other works. But I'm going to read a little bit of Everyday Use, as you can hear the language and you can see the beginning of the story. The first page is really a little small bio of Alice Walker, but then the story begins at the bottom of the page. So I'll read this in the page after. I will wait for her in the yard that Maggie and I made so clean and wavy yesterday afternoon. A yard like this is more comfortable than most people know. It's not just a yard. It is like an extended living room. When the hard clay is swept clean as a floor and the fine sand around the edges lined with tiny, irregular grooves, anyone can come and sit and look up into the elm tree and wait for the breezes that never come inside the house. Maggie will be nervous until after her sister goes. She will stand hopelessly in corners, homely and ashamed of the burn scars down her arms and legs, eyeing her sister with a mixture of envy and awe. She thinks her sister has held life always in the palm of one hand, that no is a word the world never learned to say to her. You've no doubt seen those TV shows where the child who has made it is confronted as a surprise by her mother and father tottering in weakly from backstage. A pleasant surprise, of course. What would they do if parent and child came on the show only to curse out and insult each other? On TV, mother and child um, embrace and smile into each other's faces. Sometimes the mother and father weep. The child wraps them in their arms and leans across the table to tell how she would not have made it without their help. I have seen these programs. Sometimes I have a dream, sometimes I dream a dream in which Dee and I are suddenly brought together on a TV program of this sort. Out of a dark and soft-seated limousine, I am ushered into the bright room filled with many people. There I meet a smiling, gray, spotty man like Johnny Carson, who shakes my hand and tells me what a fine girl I have. Then we are on stage, and Dee's embracing me with tears in her eyes. She pins on my dress a large orchid, even though she has once told me that she thinks orchids are tacky flowers. In real life, I am a large, big-boned woman with rough, man-working hands. In the winter, I wear flannel nightgowns to bed and overalls during the day. I can kill and clean a hog as mercilessly as a man. My fat keeps me hot in zero weather. I can work outside all day, breaking ice to get water for washing. I can eat pork liver cooked over the open fire minutes after it comes steaming from the hog. One winter, I knocked a bull calf straight in the brain between the eyes with a sledgehammer and had the meat hung up to chill before nightfall. But of course, all of this does not show on television. I am the way my daughter would want me to be, 100 pounds lighter, my skin like an uncooked barley pancake. My hair glistens in the hot, bright lights. Johnny Carson has much to do to keep up with my quick and witty tongue. But that is a mistake. I know before even I wake. I know even before I wake up. Whoever knew a Johnson with a quick tongue? Who could ever even imagine me looking at a strange white man in the eye? It seems to me I have talked to them, always with one foot raised in flight, with my head turned in whichever way is farthest from them. Dee, though, she would always look anyone in the eye. Hesitation was no part of her nature. Okay. So what about what I read with this one? Have you heard anything that you can comment on? I see Alan wrote about imagery in the story. I don't know if he was talking about this story or the one or the shorty story. Any ideas, any questions? I'll pause a moment. I'll take a sip to wet my throat. Okay. Well, this story is interesting for many reasons, right? You're getting a sense of time and place with it, right? So it takes place in the 60s, 70s, right? At that time period, it takes place in the South because there's a big, we know there's a house with a yard, right? We know there's a mother and two daughters. We get a little bit of Maggie, right? She's the one that will be nervous until after her sister goes, right? She's going to be standing hopelessly in corners, homely and ashamed of the burn scars down her arms and legs, right? So Maggie's got burn scars. She's homely. She's staying at home. She's going to be nervous until the sister leaves. You learn about the sister Dee, right? She sees her that life has always, she had life always in the palm of one hand, that knows a word the world has never learned to say to her, right? So Dee's and Maggie are opposites. So interesting because we got these two siblings, and you're going to learn that there is some rivalry between the two of them to a certain extent. And in this story, you're going to be introduced to a quilt, right? It's called Everyday Use because there's a quilt that is in the house, and that one daughter, Maggie, was promised, but suddenly Dee comes from college and from California and comes in and looks at it and says, I want it. And says the world has never said no to her. Doesn't expects to get what she wants. So so that is so in this story, you'll meet a quilt, so which would be an amazing symbol of culture, of many things. And you'll also have two sisters, right, with rivalry. And so it's interesting because we read the Buddha principle, and with that one, we had two brothers who were rivals. And in this story, we have two sisters that are rivals. So we see how sibling rivalry could look the same or differently. That could be a theme for an essay. Be looking at how sibling rivalry looks in these two stories. Okay. And is that, no, there's one more. So the last story we're going to introduce you to today is called What You Pawn, I Will Redeem, and that's by Sherman Alexie. Sherman Alexie is a Native American writer, and he very often writes about Native American culture. I'll just say a couple of things about this story that's interesting. This is a story that's a journey of a main character. And if you look at this part here, it says noon. And so that's how the story is broken up. This one's interesting structure because he basically he breaks it up with time. So that's noon, 1 p.m., 2 p.m., 3 p.m. So he's taking 4 p.m., he's taking you through a day, right? The noon is the longest because that's the part of the exposition he's setting up the story. So let me read about What You Pawn, I Will Redeem. And I'll just read the first page, and then I'll talk more about the essay that you will need to write by next Monday. One day you have a home, and the next you don't. But I'm not going to tell you my particular reasons for being homeless because it's my secret story. And Indians have to work hard to keep secrets from hungry white folks. I'm Spokane Indian boy, an interior Salish, and my people have lived within a 100-mile radius of Spokane, Washington, for at least 10,000 years. I grew up in Spokane, moved to Seattle 23 years ago for college, flunked out after 2 semesters, worked various blue and bluer collar jobs, married 2 or 3 times, fathered 2 or 3 kids, and then went crazy, Of course, crazy is not the official definition of my mental problem, but I don't think asocial disorder fits it either, because that makes me sound like I'm a serial killer or something. I've never hurt another human being, at least not physically. I've broken a few hearts in my time, but we've all done that. So I'm nothing special in that regard. I'm boring heartbreaker too. I never dated or married more than one woman at a time. I didn't break hearts into pieces overnight. I broke them slowly and carefully, and I didn't set any land speed records running out the door. Piece by piece, I disappeared. I've been disappearing ever since. I've been homeless for 6 years now. If there's such a thing as an effective homeless man, then I'm suppose I'm effective. Being homeless is probably the only, and let me just finish the phrase, the only thing I've ever been good at. I know where to get the best free food. I've made friends with the restaurant and convenience store managers who let me use their bathrooms. And I don't mean the public bathrooms either. I mean the employee bathrooms, the clean ones hidden behind the kitchen or the pantry or the cooler. I know it sounds strange to be proud of this, but it means a lot to me because being trustworthy enough to piss in somebody else's clean bathroom. Maybe you don't understand the value of a clean bathroom, but I do. Okay, so that is the beginning of Sherman Alexi's What You Pawn I Shall Redeem. In this story, you're already meeting the protagonist. He's speaking in first person, and I can tell you that the protagonist's name is Jackson Jackson, and he's homeless. We learn he says he's been diagnosed as being crazy. We also learned that he's an alcoholic and has a drinking problem. So in this story, you not only encountered this very animated, we talked about the idea of an anti-hero, that Jackson Jackson is an anti-hero. You want to cheer for him, but he keeps doing things that make you smack your head and say, what the hell is he doing? So that's Jackson Jackson. In it, the story, the plot is simply that he sees his grandmother's regalia, like this ceremonial dress that she had, and he walks by a pawn shop and sees it in the window. He goes, "That's my grandmother's." He goes in, and they actually verify that is his grandmother's regalia. And the pawn shop owner says, "You know what? Like, I got it, but I could sell it back to you." And he says, "Okay." And I think he says it's $1,000, but he says he'll give him a discount, like $995. And then he says, "I'm going to give you $20 and get started." He goes, "You can come back tomorrow. This way, in 24 hours." With the money, I'll let you have, you can have the regalia. So Jackson Jackson meets up with his friends, and they go out to try to raise $1,000 in a day, and come back the next day to buy the grandmother's regalia. So if you have not read this story, or if you have, what might you think will happen? Do you think Jackson Jackson is going to get the regalia or not? And you can unmute. You can just type it in. You can say yes, no. I never figured out the poll. Oh, I have to get out of here to do the polling. To ask you on a poll, who thinks he will get it? Who thinks he will not? All right, that's a safe answer, Alan. Maybe. All right, I'll take it. I'll take any answer. Excellent. So those are 5 stories. Now, those are just the other 5 stories that are in there. I'm going to stop sharing for a minute and I'll be back. Okay. So those are only the 5 stories that are in 5 stories, but we've read so many, right? And so you can pick any of the stories, any of the fiction stories that you read, not poetry. We're done with poetry for now, right? Any of the fiction stories. And so I'm going to go over the assignment now with you all. I'm going to share my screen again. And okay, I think I did. I was just making sure I'm recording today's class. So let's go to Blackboard, right? So you're now in my Blackboard. You're seeing mine, and mine is like all the classes I've taught over the years. Let me swing to the bottom to where our class is, and here we go. All right, this is our class, spring term 2021. And so I'm going to go to discussions. And so right now in discussions, it's up, right? This is what is up. This document is also in another part, but all the information in this document is up on Blackboard as well. And I'll just say in course content, it's here too. Let's see. All right. If you go to the course content, you go to your fiction folder, it's going to be two versions, a PDF and a docs Word one. I'm going to click it. If I click it, I'm going to open it, and boom, there it is, right? So the information is there in Blackboard, in the fiction section, in the dashboard as well. So let's take a look, okay? I'll go here. Okay, let me just use the this handout here. No, not that one. I'm going to close it. Oops. Excuse me, everybody. I'm just going to close all these. And here, let's just do that one. Okay. So the date for it is Sunday, April 11th. I think I was going to have it another day, but I think originally it was going to be due this Wednesday and Wednesday the 7th, but we moved it to April 11th, so you wouldn't be spending entire spring break writing. Some of you, if you were doing that, that's great, but if you weren't required to do that, I was trying to make sure that you all took time to rest. And so it'll be due next week's on Sunday, this Sunday by 11:59 p.m., right? So here it says essay must be submitted to Turnitin and formatted as a Word PDF document, as a Word or a PDF document. So now you have to either have it in Word or in PDF to submit it to Turnitin. I'll explain Turnitin in a minute. Well, after this part. So first, the assignment is students are asked to select one or multiple stories discussed in class or from the short story folder in the course content section in Blackboard. The student shall then write an essay that identifies and illustrates the elements of fiction explored in our classes and readings, including character analysis, setting, theme, symbolism, imagery, metaphor, similes, dramatic structure, plot, among others. Okay, so let me make this a little bigger, sorry. Okay, so that's the assignment, right? So you're gonna pick a story, and then or two stories or multiple stories, and then you're going to write an essay looking at the elements of fiction that we have discussed. So your last assignment for the Buddha principle was also a little bit of a prep, right? It asked you to do a character analysis, and I gave you very clear, very kind of, well, I think very clear instructions on how to do that, right? So that you could follow it. And I asked you to focus on one character and one way to look at it, like through personality, to role, right? Description. So, if you did that exercise and you did that assignment, right, and you got my feedback, because even the last student that submitted one, the last one, I looked it over. So if you submitted that, you got my feedback on it, right? If you submit it today or tomorrow, I will have time in the next day or two to give you feedback on it. But that was also getting you ready for this next essay. So you could stick with the Buddha principle and you could develop that into your full essay if you want to. You had the assignment, you've had smaller assignment as some of the other ones on the judge's wife, right? You had an assignment with that one. So I can go to Blackboard because I'm drawing a blank on the other assignments. Let me see course content discussions here. So you've done, we did the Buddha principle one together. We did one on cathedral, right? And the judge's wife in one of these days, right? So we did some stuff with sticks. So you've done a couple of writing assignments, either looking at character, looking at a theme, looking at some specific element of fiction with it, and then you had to do an assignment. So you could take any of those assignments and expand it and build it and make your essay, but you can start with a whole new story or another angle. So one way it looks like, let's say if you were going to do character analysis, you could say, all right, I'm going to analyze 3 characters in this story, right? In the Buddha principle, I want to analyze the narrator, I want to analyze his brother Rafa, and I want to analyze the mom. So you've got 3 characters that you can build an essay over. Let's say if you wanted to, and you could do that character analysis with any of the stories, right? Because all of them have characters in it. So that's just one of many options. Another option could be looking at a particular theme, right? So you can explore the theme of forgiveness in just forgiveness, right? Or you can, or the theme of fidelity, right? Of being, fidelity not only means cheating, but it also means being honest and trustworthy in your relationship, right? Faithfulness, right? So we've got, if you want to do the theme of faithfulness, you can, or fidelity, you can just stick with forgiveness, or you could also look at it with Alma, because Alma was about cheating, right? So it's about being trustworthiness inside of a relationship. So you could look at that. You could use 2 stories to talk about one theme, right? Another theme, like I talked about, was sibling rivalry. And so that we've got the 2 brothers in, you can just do it with 1 story, but you could also make it richer and include everyday use and see how it looks with the 2 of them, how sibling rivalry looks in 1 story, how sibling rivalry looks at another. Does it look different between gender? Like these were 2 brothers, those are 2 sisters, right? That's another way you can look at the stories. You can write about them. We talked about the dramatic arc, right, of the story, like a climax, the exposition, the conclusion, right? Those 5, that triangle. You could look at a story and examine its dramatic arc, right? And talk about that. Like a paragraph could be each, like an exposition, a paragraph on exposition, a paragraph on rising action, a paragraph on the climax, a paragraph on the falling action, and a paragraph on the denouement, right? The conclusion. So that could be, those 5 there with your introduction and your conclusion, and you've got that. So if you wanted to explore symbolism, let's say that's more of a, so we mentioned, we read cathedral has a big symbol in it, the cathedral itself, what it means, spirituality, the spiritual experience of the story, right? There is forgiveness has the arm, right? That symbolizes the relationship, it symbolizes loss, it symbolizes perseverance, it symbolizes trust, it has so many symbols, the arm in forgiveness. So you could focus just on 1 story, right, about symbolism, or you could say, I'm going to look at different stories. And I mentioned 2, at least 2. There's more that we've already read, but of the ones I read today, I mentioned the quilt is a big symbol in everyday use, and at least I think Catherine read it. So you've read it, be like becoming reacquainted with it. And then there's also the regalia in Sherman Alexie's What You Pawn I Will Redeem. So so you can come at this assignment from different angles, right? You can come at it from looking at, okay. So so let me go through it, and then Riviano, I'm gonna address your question, and then I'm gonna open it up for questions for all of you, because I wanna make sure that we're clear on what is expected for next week, Monday, for Sunday night, for you to submit. So again, you're going to write a well-organized, well-developed, correct essay that should be at least 3 pages in length, but not more than 5 pages. Format it in MLA, which means the margins of the first page are 1 inch. Okay, it's telling me internet is unstable, so bear with me. That it's double spaced, that the typeface should be Times Roman or Arial and be 12 point. So this should be the 2 typefaces you should use. Some of you use the default one, which is Calibri or something like that. Please fix it. It should be Times Roman or Arial, and it should be 12 point. The first page is set up to include your name, the professor's name, the class section and date, in that order, in the upper left-hand margin, not on the first page only, and each page numbered in the header in the upper right-hand corner of each page with the student's last name. And this is an example, if I was a student, it'd be Rice-Gonzalez 1 for the first page, and it'd be Rice-Gonzalez 2, Rice-Gonzalez 3, but we put that in the header, right? The essay should have a title, right? All essays should have a title. And then again, the deadline is on here like 3 times, right? Like here, right? April 11th by 11:59 is here, April 11th by 11:59, and just before you leave is due by April 11th at 11:59, okay? So Viviano, you're gonna write about Rebecca Brown's story. So do you have any questions about it, or you have an idea of how you're gonna look at it, like thematically or from structure, or? Symbolism. Okay. Yeah, I would say that everyone that probably like you're gonna have to read a little bit about from a handout for Wednesday's class, but I think your homework really tonight should be that you should decide what story you're gonna write about or what stories you're gonna write about and what you're gonna write about. So I know Alan, you said that's a lot of options. It's great. If you want an assignment, then I can tell class, why don't you think of symbolism? That's something that is always rich to write about. And I mentioned at least cathedral. Viviano's looking at symbolism in Rebecca Bound's Forgiveness. I let you know that there's two other stories, Sherman Alexie's What You Point I Will Redeem and Everyday Use. They all have very clear, very layered symbols. Like one thing means lots of things in those stories. So if any of you are trying to I don't know what to do, just give me an option, just tell me what to do. I'm going to tell you, pick symbolism. And you got two that we read and two that we haven't read. Yes, so the Buddha principle does fall under fiction. So all of the stories that are in the folder, right? So I'm still in our Blackboard. I'm gonna go to course content, and here we are. We're in fiction, we click the fiction. Inside of fiction now, we have the assignment is in there now. It's due April 11th. There's the elements of fiction, but here are all the stories, right? The stories we read were A and P, right? By John Updike. Before that, what's in the handout was Sticks by George Saunders. We read the Garcia Marquez One of These Days, right? We read Raymond Carver's Cathedral. We read no, we didn't read Everyday Use. We read Forgiveness by Rebecca Brown. We read The Judge's Wife, right? I just introduced you to Apollo. For Junot Diaz, we read Alma, and we read the Buddha Principle. And I just introduced you to Good Man is Hard to Find, Shorty, and What You Point I Will Redeem. So, so you can use there's a principle. So yes, I answered Ramat's question, and Elizabeth only used one reading, or we can use two. Yes, you can use two, you can use three. The idea is use what you need to write the essay that you want to write, right? So if you're one of your classmates, Viviano just shared, he's thinking of writing about forgiveness, and he's going to focus on symbolism, and he's going to do one story. But if you wanted to do symbolism and how it looks in different stories, you could look at Forgiveness as one of them, Cathedral's another one, Sticks is another one, those sticks, remember that Sticks is another one. We can look at how symbolism looks in multiple stories. So Elizabeth, yes, you can do two if you want to do two. Any other questions with the assignments, or ideas that you want to bounce around for the assignment? Okay. If not, then, or if you have one later on, put it in the chat and let me know. Wait, Paul, Professor, I thank you for your time. Okay, good, sure. Of course, Alan. So if you don't have questions with that, the class is not over yet. We still have we have whatever, 25 minutes. So, so I'm gonna, okay, so then all the information is there on Blackboard. Definitely tonight, think of a story. So we're gonna do a transition. Yes, Adrian, you can definitely analyze more than one character. You have to think, if you're writing a minimum of 5-paragraph essay, you want to start with at least 3 characters, right, that you want to look at. So you have stuff to write about. Like sometimes you could look at one character from different angles, but you could also look at multiple characters, right? Or you could look at, I'm thinking I'm trying to think of some characters that there may be some kind of connection. Maybe you could look at, fathers in the story, or mothers, right? In the stories, and look at how 3 mothers look. So, but Adrian, definitely okay. Any other questions? Okay. Then now, if you look in your folders, when you go to your course content folder, there is another folder. I mean, on mine, you see more. You see things that you don't see in your folder. Here, you're going to see research paper. I'm working on that one, and I'll make it available once it's complete. But right now, there's 2 more things. Oh, I want to say about the fiction essay. So then when you're ready to submit your essay, you will come here to this part. Yeah. Yes, Adrian, characters may overlap. Yeah. So you can go into, you come here to the fiction essay. Oh, excuse me. You hit view and complete, and then it says submit, turn in an assignment. And then here you go in, you look for your name, you click your name, and then you write it, you write your name in there, you put the title of what you're doing, the fiction essay, what your title, and then you choose, you go here, choose from this computer, and you can upload your document when you're done, and then you hit submit. Okay. And so that's what we're going to do for your fiction essay. When you're ready to do it, you're going to upload it, and then I'll get it into the turn it in, right? So I'll just go over that again. So we go to course content, right? This is where your major folders are. This is where the fiction essay will be, is this little kind of blue thing with a red arrow. That's where you're going to submit it. That's turn it in. You're going to hit view complete. And then when it gives you this next screen, it's going to ask you for your name, the first name, the last name, the title of your piece, or you can find your name there. It'll auto fill it. Then you're going to choose from this computer. You're going to click, wherever your file is. Then you're going to hit upload, and it's going to upload to turn it in. Okay. That's where we submit the essay. Yes, Catherine, this is where you're going to submit the essay. Okay. So, also now in course content, in addition to this folder to submit it, the theater folder is here. So we're going to begin I'm going to read a little bit from this, Elements of Theater. Okay, and I'm just going to open it up. And so before I start, just have a question. How many people, let me just see this. Hold on one second. I'm going to stop my share for a second. Yeah, this is why. Let's see if this works like this. All right. I'm going to see if I could work this out before the next class. Let me try this one more time. Okay, yeah. It's just not working. So, okay, I'll just ask. I was going to try to do a poll. Yeah, the poll just doesn't seem to work on mine. It keeps giving me an error message. Okay, so Alan said he's seen some plays. Has folks in the class seen the play? Have you gone to see the play? Even at school or maybe on television even? No, maybe I don't know. Yeah, and I'm sorry, I sent you all an opportunity. Oh, well, I guess you can see it. I'll send you a link, okay? Newvic Theater. Okay, do you remember? No, got a couple of no's. I saw Hamilton on YouTube. Yep, that counts. On YouTube, wow, for my history class. Let's see. Yesterday, yeah, I sent the email so you guys could see. One of the things, I'm a playwright as well as a fiction writer, and there was okay, cool. You saw Hamilton at the Newvic Theater. That's amazing. Okay, so Hamilton seems to be popular. A lot of people have either seen it have seen the play, or have seen it in on the Disney Channel. Disney Plus aired it, I think, sometime last year. Excellent. So yeah, I mean, I normally when we're in session, one of the things I do at Ostos is I bring different plays to Ostos. And so we sometimes we'll go together as a class. Sometimes it's not during class time, but it would be the evenings. But there's usually 2 a semester, and so there was opportunities for some students to go to some. I mentioned to you all that I am connected to a space called BAD, the Bronx Academy of Arts and Dance, and sometimes there's plays that happen there, so students can go there and see plays. So there's different opportunities to see plays, but plays are not happening as they normally do, and they are happening on Zoom. Um, I'm trying to think if there's any other ones. I'll try to see if I can find a few more that are happening and send it to you with more time than the day of. But the one that I was involved with, called Sheer Pandemic, I believe the link is going to be available. So I will send it to the class, and you can watch it if you choose, as an extra credit thing. But but that's kind of like what they're doing now as a reading. And if I come across any other plays that I think would be great for you to see, and there's stuff online too, that I'll share that with you as well. Okay. But Hamilton is a great play. I mean, I didn't see it live. I saw it on when Disney Channel put it on, Disney Plus put it on. That's when I got to see Hamilton. So let me just, okay. So I'm going to just read a little bit of the Elements of Theater handout, to all of you, and it's so you can tell it. So one of the reasons why I do drama after we've done poetry and fiction is because I feel that each unit builds on the next. Like poetry focuses on the word, right? The sentence, distilling a line, right? Really looking at the sections of it. Fiction you start getting now a dramatic arc, right? You start getting a story, right? A beginning, a middle, and an end. A poem, unless it's a narrative poem, doesn't necessarily have the traditional middle, beginning, and end, right? If you think of Ken Adoniesio's first poem for you, it's about feelings, it's about thoughts, it's about, this idea of permanence in a relationship, but it's not necessarily a story, right? Not a story like The Judge's Wife, where, Casilda shows up, um, Nicholas Vidal sees her, he dismisses her, and then he causes terror in the town. And then ultimately, when he meets her again, is when he falls in love with her and she dies. So that's a story, right? We can trace the beginning, a middle, and end to that. So in plays, the whole idea of dramatic arc that we talked about in fiction, as I mentioned, comes from theater. They talk about the dramatic arc of a play, right? They talk about where's the climax of the play, right? Where is the resolution? What's the final scenes in the play that kind of wrap things up? There's this great play called A Streetcar Named Desire by this great American playwright named Tennessee Williams. And it's been done on Broadway many times. It's been made into a movie. There's a actor named Marlon Brando, who was very famous in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And he played Stanley Kowalski. And in it, it's about this woman who is slowly losing her mind through the play, and she's the sister of his wife, and they have a very antagonistic relationship. Anyway, there's a climactic scene in it, but the wrap up is they take her out. They take the sister, out to an insane asylum, and that's how that story resolves. That's how the issues in that story resolve itself. And people sometimes feel uncomfortable because, she's basically a victim of society. She's a victim of the ideas and the morals of the South, the ideas of the role of a woman in society, and of this Stanley Kowalski, who's pretty brutal as a character. So there's a lot of reasons that contribute to her condition, but the reasons that contribute to her condition are not really addressed, and they're addressed by her being put away. So that's A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. But anyway, I think so. They talk about the dramatic arc. They talk about this. There's poetry in theater. There's imagery in theater. There's symbolism in theater. All these things that we're talking about exist in theater, right? So in your handout that's called Elements of Theater, there's a drama or a play is a piece of writing that is presented almost exclusively through dialogue, right? So that's a different element, right? Dialogue is a play is almost all talking, whereas like this person says, that person says, this person says, that person says, where there is dialogue in fiction, and there's even dialogue in poetry sometimes, but it's not determined by the dialogue. The dialogue is part of what is working with it. In theater, dialogue, if you look at the page, that's where you're mainly going to be reading what the characters say. So it's mainly it's almost exclusively driven through dialogue. And like a short story or novel, I mentioned all this, that it has characters and plot, even symbolism and other things. However, in which way they are presented to the audience is different. Because unlike a short story or novel, the play is meant to be performed in front of an audience, right? So the purpose of the play is not to be written and read and handed out, but it's really the purpose of the play is for it to be performed, right? And so that changes the entire game, right? Because even though you can read poetry dramatically and read it in public, and I read fiction to you. I'm a fiction writer, and I read, in schools and libraries and cafes and bars and all that stuff. I read my fiction. But that's me sharing fiction to an audience in a particular way. Plays are supposed to be acted, right? So when a playwright sits down to write a play, they don't necessarily always think about that somebody's going to read it. They want somebody to see it. Okay, so there is a visual element to plays that brings the story to life. There's a physical human being, people, characters. They're talking, they're actors. There's a director, there's a whole team of things. So the way in which, but since one of the great things is that about a play being written is that even if you've never seen a play, now you can read the play and at least get an understanding what the play is about. But the way the play is laid out on the page is very different from the way prose work is laid out on the page or poetry is laid out on the page. There's a formatting that happens with it. So the next section of your handout talks a little bit about that formatting, right? The dramatic form, right? Plays are not written in paragraphs like a novel or story. Instead, they're written in lines of dialogue in the form of a script. So you can see the examples from the Tennessee Williams, The Glass Menagerie. There's another play by Tennessee Williams. If you haven't, because I've mentioned the same playwright twice in this class, clearly you know that I am a fan of Tennessee Williams' work. But he wrote a play called The Glass Menagerie. The characters are told exactly what to say for the dialogue. And typically these scripts are broken down into one or more acts, right? And so a major division of the play. So usually the plays could be 1 act, 2 acts, or 3 acts. And then each act is divided by a scene, right? So the scenes are the individual sections of an act. So usually a change in the setting means that there will be a change in either act or the scene. So it could be that maybe one scene takes place in the bedroom, another scene takes place in the living room, So then when they change scenes, the change setting, sometimes that could be it. Time could be other reasons for changing scenes, or action, plot could be a reason for changing scenes too. So here's what it would look like, right? If you could see the screen, let me see if I can make it even a little bigger. Yeah, okay, great. So you would see, it looks like Act 1, Scene 1, right? This is an excerpt, right? So this is what it looks like, the beginning of The Glass Menagerie. It starts giving you what they call stage directions, right? So you're reading the directions of what's happening on stage and what could be happening. So here it says, the interior has lit up softly, and through the scrim, we see Amanda and Laura seated at the table in the upstage area. So scrim is kind of like this piece of fabric that's all the way in the very front of the stage, that when the lights are off in the audience and the lights are on stage, you can kind of see through it. Some plays project onto scrims. The scrim also can come up. So at the beginning of this one, there's an interior is softly lit, and through the scrim, we see Amanda and Laura seated at a table in the upstage area. So Amanda is calling out. Here's the dialogue, right? Amanda calling Tom. Oh, this is always an error. There should be another line that says Tom, and he says, yes, mother. Then Amanda says, we can't say grace until you come to the table. Tom, coming, mother. He bows slightly and withdraws, reappearing a few minutes later at his place at the table. Amanda to her son. Honey, don't push with your fingers. If you have to push with something, the thing to push with is a crust of bread. And chew. Animals have secretions in their stomachs which enable them to digest food without mastication. But human beings are supposed to chew their food before they swallow it down. Eat food leisurely, son, and really enjoy it. A well-cooked meal has a lot of delicate flavors that have to be held in the mouth for appreciation. So chew your food and give your salivary glands a chance to function. Tom deliberately lays his imaginary fork down and his chair back from the table. I haven't enjoyed one bite of this dinner because of your constant directions on how to eat it. It's you that makes me rush through meals with your hawk-like attention to every bite I take. Sickening, spoils my appetite. All these discussion of animal secretions and salivary glands, mastication. And he goes away and she says, temperament like a metropolitan star. He rises and crosses downstage. You're not excused from the table. He says, I'm getting a cigarette. This is for you to see how the dialogue, how a play looks, which is different than the way, a short story that we've been reading right now looks. So the way it's laid out on the page, the way it's structured, very different. I think there's more of it. There's a little more. Yeah, Amanda, you smoke too much. Laura rises. Laura, I'll bring in the blancmange, and he remains standing with his cigarette by the portieres during the following. So that's one way that theater looks different, right? That the way it looks on the page. And another way is the setting and the stage, right? So I'm going to stop here. And this handout is in your, is in the folder as I went here, right? There's theater info. It's called Elements of Theater. And so I want you to read this, just like 2.5 more pages, right? So we read this, right? So there's this, what do we read? Yeah, we read the first page, right? So there's 2, 3, and 3/4 of 4. So there's 2 3/4 pages left. So your homework is going to be to finish reading the handout and also to zero in on what story that you want to do for your essay. And that's it. I think I have not been sharing my screen. No. Right. And that's it. Right. I'm actually not. Right. Dramatic pose. Let me look at these. Okay. Romeo and Juliet. Yeah, definitely. Romeo and Juliet is definitely, that's Shakespeare, William Shakespeare. And Shakespeare's another one who's written many, many plays. Romeo and Juliet, Julius Caesar, The Tempest, Hamlet. And Hamlet's going to be important because that's what we're going to be. I'm going to give you a synopsis of Hamlet. We're going to read a story a play that's related to Hamlet. There is Macbeth. There are so many plays that Shakespeare's written, but Romeo and Juliet is definitely one of them. So yes, and right now, Odalis, I wasn't sharing my screen. I was just reading the beginning, but I think I see what you're saying, that I'm talking about how it's laid out on the page. Let me share really quickly so you can see it. This is what I was reading here. It's Elements of Theater, and then this is the how it's laid out, how you see Act 1, right? Scene 1, and then they give you directions. The interior is lit up softly, and then you see Amanda. You see the characters' dialogue, like Amanda to her son, "Honey, don't push with your food," and so you get to see all that. So this is what I read on that first page. So Dalis, thanks for sharing that. Sharing that I wasn't sharing my page. Okay. So are there any questions with the assignment, with what you need to do for class on Wednesday, which is basically read the rest of the handout, the couple pages of the handout, and decide what story or stories you're going to use for your essay. I will pause and see if there's any unmuting or any chatting. Okay. So if there are no questions, I'll hang out for a few more minutes if people have them, but if not, we're good for today. Welcome back from spring break. I hope the rest of the semester we can smooth and coast through it and do your little good afternoon, take care little thing in the chat so that I could mark everybody down in your attendance. Okay. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, Carlos. Take care, Taizela, Ramad, and Stanjay. Enjoy your day as well. I think it's pretty nice, right? It should be a nice day. I'm going to try to make sure I go out. One thing I love about my new apartment is that I have light and I have sunlight in the weather. Take care, Adrian and Odalis and Kayla, and Lindsay. Take care of yourselves. Okay, Xavier. Thanks, Catherine. Yeah, Catherine. So it's not to summarize the elements of fiction. It's basically you pick whichever ones you want to talk about. So like one of your classmates has cited symbolism. Maybe somebody wants to talk about metaphor. Maybe another element of fiction is character analysis. Another element of fiction is themes. So you can select what you want. But I think usually just begin with a story. Think which story you like the most, and then think of what elements exist in that story that you could write about. Okay, and the number of elements that you can choose from is whatever you need to write your story. So if you're doing a minimum of a 5-paragraph essay, if you want to pick 3 different elements, you could do that. You can, find, but you could find something like, like the forgiveness that Viviana's going to work on. And you want to do symbolism, one arm symbolizes many different things. So you can talk about the different aspects of symbolism, but you should make sure that it has at least 3 different things you can talk about so that you have stuff to talk about. Can I use a short story you read today? Yes. You can use Shorty. You can use any of the stories that I read today. You could read it. Shorty is actually a short story. It's a lot of fun. Sometimes when we read that in class together, I ask students, what do you think? Well, you'll see. I shouldn't say anything if you're going to use it, but you can use Shorty. You can use Shorty. You can use Apollo. You can use any of the stories that we read today. All right. Thank you, Stacy. Any last questions? Thanks, Carl. Okay, yeah, definitely. Also, yes, Catherine said that they would email me if she has questions. But if you have questions, certainly email me as well. All right, take care. Let me say goodbye to Dana. All right, I'm going to close the class. Take care, Elizabeth.